I'm Ben McAdams. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I represent the political center, and I'm joined by John Dougal on the right.
Hey, great to be with you.
And Shireen Ghorbani on the left.
Hi, happy to have you. And hey, listeners,
Welcome
appreciate
back.
you tuning in.
Well, big news on both the domestic and international front. Why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? First of all, sad to say there was another assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And regardless of how you plan to vote in the presidential election, I think that is really sad to see the threat and I'm sure that the Harris campaign is probably feeling the same pressures and same threats, and the what this does to the psyche of our elected officials. And tell us your thoughts about that.
I couldn't agree more on a desire to see less assassination attempts. In the broad sense, just a de-escalation of violence around our politics. It is awful. It's hard to explain. I know that I don't explain everything that happens in the political world to my fourth grader, but it is hard to explain this and to talk about. We understand it in terms of right and wrong is deeply wrong, but why this keeps happening is confusing. And I think it's really unsettling in many ways.
I think you've got the dynamic for the Secret Service, who's supposed to protect the president or the presidential candidates. We already know the problems that they had in Butler, Pennsylvania. Now you look at this, and yes, they stopped the potential shooting before it happened. They saw the rifle muzzle and were able to act and stopped it, whatever was going to happen. And ultimately, the person was arrested. But then when you start hearing that he was there on the grounds for 12 hours and this and that and the other, there's kind of an element where it seems like the Secret Service is just struggling to show that they're up to the capabilities.
Yeah.
And I get that. All you need is one bad act, despite all the effort and planning. But, we're hearing some of the reports coming out of that shooting in Pennsylvania, where some of the agents, Secret Service agents, were well prepared in doing their job, but others were not. And now you as a candidate or as an elected official now start to question the integrity of those that are supposed to have your back from a safety perspective that may not.
Yeah.
Well, I've talked to elected officials here in Utah and who are concerned about their own safety. And, really the underpinnings of our democracy are that people feel empowered to act on behalf of their constituents and what they believe is in the best interest of their city, their county, their state, and the country. And when you start getting elected officials who say, who are concerned about a vote they might cast or a position they might take, that is getting right at the heart of our democracy. And I don't care what your political persuasion is or what mainstream or extreme idea you want to espouse. This is the system we have, and you want people to feel comfortable and confident to express their opinions. So it really is scary times.
Well, and this is coming down to a local level where we've had recent reports on, was it the FBI that intercepted?
FBI intercepted an envelope in Reno, Nevada that was addressed to Lieutenant Governor Henderson with some white powder in it. And I guess this had been sent out to something like 20 some odd lieutenant governors or secretary of state, folks that deal with elections in other states. And so you look at this, and even if the white powder was harmless, it was intended to be a threat. It was intended to send a message. And I tell folks, we should be passionate in our debate, but political violence is wrong. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your leanings are, your political affiliation. Political violence is wrong.
Yeah.
And I know some are saying we need to tone down the rhetoric, and a part of me agrees with that. But there's a part of me that says, despite the rhetoric, we should be mature enough, adult enough not to engage in violence. Even if someone disagrees with me vehemently, I shouldn't, go down that path, no matter who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so to the elected officials who may be listening and to our listeners, we may love or hate what our elected officials, the positions they're taking, but I think we all need to agree that we defend their right to say it, to act in ways that may infuriate us, that we may love, but we may hate. We defend your right to do that.
Yeah, to be safe.
Yeah, don't be afraid. Can
I tell you the name of this group? This group was supposedly United States Traitor Elimination Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly designed to send a message.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to international. Let's go from bad to worse, maybe, or I don't know. I don't decision
terrible.
Characterize all terrible, but on an international front, since our last show, the last time we recorded this show, the pager plot in Israel.
Yeah. So this was a coordinated attack where and now I'm forgetting all of the numbers, but basically all of the pagers that were associated with folks in somewhere along the supply chain, individuals associated with Hezbollah ended up with these pagers. And at the same moment, they started beeping, which kind of indicated that a text or a message was coming through, and shortly thereafter exploded. And there were many reports of people losing eyesight, vision, losing like hands or blowing off fingers, and other injuries associated with this. Some people were killed. And then we also the next day there was a follow-up attack that happened here. I don't know, John.
With walkie-talkies.
With walkie-talkies.
And so some may ask, okay, this was attack going after the Hezbollah leadership. Okay, they don't use cell phones because you can track those. So they use pagers and walkie-talkies that aren't easy to track. And so somehow it sounds like Israelis injected them somewhere in the supply chain from when these pagers were manufactured to when they were supplied. And it looks like an amazingly coordinated attack that was hyper-targeted on Hezbollah leadership. Now, we know Hezbollah has been going after Israel, launching bombs into Israel for months now, if not longer. And so Israel was clearly sending a message, we want to take out their leadership. And it looks like it was highly effective and highly targeted. I mean, Leon Panetta is calling this an act of terrorism. I'll disagree with Leon. This was an act of war, but I think Israel was responding to other acts of war. When somebody launches missiles into your country, to me, I consider that an act of war. And so there's a certain point where you say, we're not going to take it anymore.
I mean, and he also went on to say, what the hell is next? And I guess, Ben, when you think about this, what is next? What do you think?
I mean, I think when you see what's happening even more recently with the largest attack on Lebanon right now, and they're talking about latest reports that I've heard, about 300 people have died in the last 24 hours as of the time we're recording this. But there just seems to be, escalation. And, some people say that, broader war in the Middle East, and others will say we already have broader war in the Middle East. So what we're thinking of and what we're seeing with the escalation of this is really scary times. And we're playing with
Israel
fire.
Bombed some sites in Lebanon right after these two attacks. So it was boom, boom, boom to try and neuter and take out leadership.
Well, we're on the precipice. If we haven't gone past the precipice, we're on the precipice, and it's
regional war.
Regional war, right?
Yep.
And time for, I think, strong leadership in the U.S. To bring back a sense of order and peace. And I think we are at a vulnerable time right now as well. And I think it's hopefully we get the election behind us and we can come back together as a country, Republicans and Democrats, in the interest of the world, because I think the world needs America's leadership.
Yeah. Wow. Couldn't agree more there.
Speaking of America's leadership, it is coming up on October 1st. So government shutdown. I was going to say October 1st, but it seems like it's every few months.
So you tell me there's a chance.
Yeah.
No,
government shutdown, stopgap funding bill. What's going on?
So Utah politicos may know, and listeners who have caught when you've co-hosted episodes for us in the past may know, but you represented, 4th District
Yes.
in the United States House of Representatives. So you understand these debates about funding and what's going on. Give us a little bit of color commentary here.
So like many government organizations, the federal government is on a budget year that begins October 1st. And so when things work as they should, we're going through our budgets like the Utah legislature does, like every city and county does, going through our budgets.
You're saying theoretically.
Theoretically. Well, they would do it.
Almost never happens, but theoretically.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a city who shuts down the city and refuses to plow snow because the Republicans and Democrats can't get along, right? So, but in Congress, there has not been a budget bill passed in many, many years. You'll get these stopgap funding bills, and you'll get half measures that go through and extend it. But, we're at a precipice right now. And you have Republicans who control a majority of the House who are saying they will not pass a funding bill that does not include some voter suppression tactics and specifically language about
I don't think they would describe it that way, but voter authentication.
Voter authentication. It is already illegal for non-U.S. citizens to vote in U.S. elections, but they want redundancy or to maybe put an exclamation point around existing law. And it really is, it really is
It's a tactic to suppress the vote. When we think about requiring people to prove citizenship, I think that even just the notion of that is quite intimidating. It's confusing. If you are a naturalized citizen and you hear things like this, I think it really does target certain folks and make it more difficult for them to vote.
Well, and afraid, and ultimately afraid.
Afraid.
And other Republicans are saying, I don't want to vote on another continuing resolution. Let's just vote on a budget.
Yeah, right. Well, it costs the U.S. government to shut it down. It costs us money every time we shut it. And these games cost us money. It's not fiscally responsible to shut down the government.
And it's deeply unpopular. Across political lines, folks that are not in office do not believe that this is an appropriate way for our government to act.
Not at all.
Yeah. I'll say something else that I think is inappropriate for our government, and that is to allow child poverty rates to skyrocket in this country. During the COVID pandemic, because of priorities that were made, in particular around the child tax credit and dollars that went into supporting families, child poverty was cut in half in the first years of the Biden administration in this country. And because I think of continued inaction and just infighting, unfortunately, the children, in this country are suffering. And so when we think about, I think, a fairly modest investment in what can fundamentally change the trajectory of a person's life in the United States of America, reducing our child poverty rate, making sure that kids have food in their bellies and they're able to live in stable housing, is ultimately an investment that pays off. I think John would disagree with me, but I'm wondering if either of you have a little bit to add on the child tax credit.
No surprise, I agree. And this is...
What?
Evidence-based practices. We know that investing in this reduces childhood poverty. And when you think about everything else we're spending money on, when a child goes to school, when we spend billions of dollars on education, and a child goes to school not having slept in the bed the night before and hungry, then you might as well flush the money for education down the drain as well. So we are flushing money down the drain if we're not investing in reducing childhood poverty, and this works.
Yeah.
One of the things that I oppose is using the tax code for these type of issues. If we're going to do it, then let's just do it as a spending program. Don't hide it in the tax code and go through and kind of camouflage it as if it's a tax break rather than a wealth transfer. Let's just be honest about it. The second thing is, I'm not convinced that this is a federal issue. While it may be something for states and local governments to deal with, I don't think it's a federal issue. And I don't think we have a history. The more and more the federal government seems to be claiming over decades that it's going to solve the poverty issue, it seems to make it worse and worse.
Yeah. I mean, I would just offer that we, again, have a real life experiment where this played out and child poverty was reduced by 50%. But what I'm really hearing you say, John, is that Utah should solve child poverty. And I agree with you. Okay.
Well, let me just say, I'd love to get back to the days when John Dougal and I used to debate policy and how not whether or not you love America or you hate America, but how to do something. And so I'd love coming here and talking about these things. So you're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I'm with Shireen Ghorbani and John Dougal. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle on Utah Public Radio. We love to hear from listeners like you. If you would like to send us a comment, email bsotapodcast@gmail.com. That's bsotapodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Shireen Ghorbani on the left.
John Dougal on the right.
And I'm Ben McAdams in the political middle. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. So before we start off in this segment, I want to give a shout out to a listener who I met. My wife and I and a friend of ours were at dinner on Friday night in Sugar House at El Cholo and came up and said hello and said that he listens to the program and likes to hear me co-host from time to time.
Oh, so we love that.
Faithful listener.
Enjoy this episode.
Yes. Yeah. We brought Ben back just for you. I'm just kidding. We're so grateful when you can sit in, but we really do appreciate our listeners and want to give just a greater shout out to Utah Public Radio, who puts out the podcast, who has us on their airways. It is Pledge Drive week. And, if this kind of dialogue, if it's important for you to hear folks speaking, trying to understand each other across political difference, you can go to upr.org and make a donation or become a sustaining member of supporting the station in this kind of work.
They would love your support.
They would love it.
So I want to jump in with an issue out of Auditor Dougal's office, since we've got him right here with us.
Hi, guys.
We're going to get nerdy, and it's going to be
which
interesting.
one is it?
Well, it's Grand County. There was an article in the Salt Lake Tribune that I read this week. You probably lived it and breathed it, but about state distributed tax revenue related to the transient room tax, hotel tax.
Well, tourism
right?
taxes.
Tourism
There were
taxes.
two different taxes, what we call TRT and TRCC. But yeah,
So take us
transient room tax
through what it means. What happened?
Yeah, so what we did is an audit, and we identified areas where Grand County didn't appear to be complying with the law when it came, from our perspective, with tourism taxes. For the transient room tax, a certain minimum must be spent on promotion, tourism promotion. And this is enticing people from outside the county, could be other places in the state or across the nation or across the world, to come to Grand County to recreate.
So you tax hotels, you tax rental cars, things like that, to bring in more people to come and stay in the area.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a win-win for the tourism
And a minimum
industry.
must be spent on promotion, and the rest can be spent on mitigation.
Things
and that
like
minimum is like
public
37%.
safety when you have a bunch of visitors coming in,
Yes,
right?
yes. And
Yeah.
so we noted concerns there, and I'll give one example. We talked some about trail ambassadors. And from my perspective, if a trail ambassador is doing, let's say, social media videos to entice people to come to the county, yeah, we would call that promotion. If a trail ambassador is cleaning up trash and reminding people to stay on the trail, handing out water bottles to them, we would consider that mitigation. And there may be some that mix and match. And I've told the county, if you can make the argument of what part is promotion versus what part is mitigation, I'm open to hearing those arguments. But given what we saw, it looked like you were underspending the statutory minimum that was required for promotion. And so there's some things that are related there. On one of the other taxes, the money, it's TRCC, so it deals with conventions and so forth, airport facilities. And that is another tourism-related tax. And what we saw was a lot of money going into essentially a senior citizen center. And so they were claiming that it's a convention facility, and then they were also claiming that it fits under the statute where it's an other facility for other gatherings. And we took issue with that, saying, well, that could justify the county courthouse, the county jail, and any other county facility where people gather. And as we read the statute, there's two ways to read it. You can either read it where it has meaning, or you can read it where it's meaningless. And we said we can't read it how it's meaningless. So there has to be some meaning. So you need to show how this is a convention. Now, we noted there were 2 rentals in 2023 for that facility. So we said that's barely being used in what we would consider a convention-like facility. They think it's being used more than that. So I said, please present the information with us. All we can go off of is the rentals that we could document. We couldn't document other things. But there is a big part of the Grand Center that is exclusively dedicated to senior, as a senior center, whether it's, quilting or other type senior activities that is dedicated exclusively for that.
Did you say quilting?
Yeah, there's
Yeah, for
quilting.
half a second I thought you said waltzing, but I'm
Quilting.
excited about both.
I mean, they might waltz too, but but that's where. And so they had some indication as we were going through wrapping up the audit. After that, we gave them about 4 weeks to start to indicate they were making changes. Latter part of July, we sent them officially what we call a 60-day notice, identify the deficiencies and giving them 60 days to remedy that. And then officially on Wednesday of last week, we put their tax money on hold, pending them getting some of the required reports submitted, as well as correcting the deficiencies we identified in the audit.
So where does this go from here?
Well, so we are waiting for them to make corrective action. And part of that corrective action is reimbursing the improperly spent money. When money is restricted for a certain purpose, it must be spent on that specific purpose. And from an audit perspective, if you spend it on something else, then you need to use your general fund money to reimburse the improperly spent money and put it back in that restricted account.
This is something we actually, Ben, you and I know
Yeah.
a bit about because these categories of taxable, I guess, or income, right, back to the county, were a big part of the budget at Salt Lake County. And when you think about, I guess I'm just thinking MOABs here, right? When we think about the amount of tourism here, it does feel like it should be easy to match the dollars that need to be spent with the demands that are, or the restrictions that are required for them. I don't know if you have more.
I mean, so these are the things for people in the Salt Lake Valley. This is the tax that funds things like Visit Salt Lake, ski promotion campaigns, other things that are intended to say, look, and hotels and ski resorts and others support this tax, even though they're the ones paying it because they want a coordinated campaign. Instead of, imagine if each ski resort had to market only themselves, but they could come up with the Ski Utah campaign and that. And so they see this as growing the pie and worth investing investing in. But I think it is important to make sure, and look, especially small communities like Park City or Moab, when you have a big influx, there is mitigation, you know, that and expenses that are associated with that. So I think state tax law recognizes the need for mitigation, the justification of this tax, which is really promotion and keeping that in balance. And that's the auditor doing the auditor's job, right?
And one of the other key things the legislature noted in the hearing last week was, okay, the legislative auditor general did an audit back 5 years ago, and then roll forward and then our audit. And so from a legislative perspective, they're seeing a pattern of misuse of those tax revenues.
It's an important note to government officials to be careful, dot I's, cross T's, and not get too creative with how these funds are used.
Yeah. Well, speaking of getting creative, I would say the decision of GOP leaders to go with a presidential preference poll over a standard primary
wasn't your preference.
Wasn't my preference. And turns out it wasn't the preference of a large number of GOP voters in the state either.
So for listeners, this is where if you were a Democrat or got a Democratic ballot, you had a ballot, right, to vote in the primary election. You had, if I recall, you had Dean Phillips and Joe Biden on our ballot.
Who?
I think there were a few others, but
maybe a few others. Dean Phillips is a close friend of mine, from Congress, so I know Dean. But
none of them made it through.
Yeah, but Republicans.
Dean Phillips, though, I got to say, a little bit of a man ahead of his time, right? I mean, fundamentally was right. Okay, but anyway, go ahead.
I'm just joking. Biden's not even there.
But Republicans did not get a ballot.
No.
They had a presidential preference poll through their caucus night, where you showed up at caucus. If you didn't show up at caucus, you didn't get a chance to vote. But if you showed up at caucus night,
no, actually, you had an opportunity to cast an absentee ballot.
It was quite complicated because I remember Natalie described to us in detail what it took, and it did take quite a bit for to vote not in person.
So, like a lot of things with elections these years, there's a lot of controversy around it. And there was a hearing scheduled at the Government Operations Subcommittee at the Legislative Interim. What happened?
Yeah, so this is the second time this has been on the agenda, I believe, in interim, or maybe there was a special meeting earlier. But anyway, so now, again, GOP leaders have really prevented a discussion from the chaos that people experienced participating in this preference poll. And my understanding is that there were a number of really not to say it's not legitimate to be irritated or concerned, but real barriers for folks with disabilities to be able to participate, really poorly orchestrated, and a lot of frustration coming from Republicans who came to this committee hearing, and I believe they were given just a few minutes, and that ultimately it was the decision to sort of continue to what do I want to say? Table it, prevent a discussion. They did not allow for the airing.
Stall and delay would be the word.
Stall and delay for the airing of grievances here. And I guess I would just say,
it's not Festivus yet.
It's not just yet, but it might be in the Utah GOP when it comes to being able to participate in these fundamental structures around, your primary. To see this so poorly executed, I think there's good reason for folks on the right to be upset with how it went down.
From my perspective, the thing I think fundamentally is political parties should be funding their own nomination process. They shouldn't be expecting the taxpayers to pay for it. So I did think this was a good idea for the party to start to go down this path. Clearly, you got to bring your supporters, your members, your voters along with you. And too many did not feel like they were informed. They didn't know what was going on. And so I think it was a good idea that was poorly executed. But I think long term, we should be looking at how do we engage the voters in the nomination process without placing that burden on the taxpayers.
Yeah.
Can we give our listeners, changing the subject, an update on the amendments that are going to be on their ballot?
Yeah. So speaking of voting, you're going to have the opportunity, and depending on where you live, there may be bonds and other issues on your ballot.
It's going to be a long ballot.
School district split where I live.
A long ballot. And this, I think, is one of the beauties of a really comprehensive vote by mail process. You're going to get that ballot right around October 15th, open that thing up, and really start digging into some of these issues. But right now, we are living in a world where Amendment D, which I would characterize as a blatant power grab, rather deceitful language, appears on our ballot.
That's the citizen initiative.
Citizen initiative undercutting, which is described.
So just know that means there's Amendment A, B, C, and D.
So D is on hold because a judge agreed that this language was deeply misleading and also that they'd missed a fundamental deadline to publish the language 60 days prior to the election. They missed that. So right now, this is up for debate. The Utah Supreme Court is meeting this week. So we'll have updates for you as the program continues. I'm sure you'll see the news.
They're hearing the appeal. Because right now it's not going to be counted.
Right. Now, there are also efforts to say Amendment A falls into a similar problem. Do you want to give a little background here?
So Amendment A is the Constitution currently says that all income tax goes to fund education. And the legislature has said they want additional flexibility. So they want to remove that earmark so that income tax goes into the general fund, and then the legislature can have the discretion as to where to spend that funding. So the UEA has come out opposed to that. They like that earmark. They like that floor for education spending. But the voters are being asked to decide to weigh in on that. And so the question is, did they meet the 60-day requirement, and should that be put on hold, just like Amendment D's been put on hold?
And this is something that the legislature passed essentially 18 months ago.
Yeah.
Year and a half ago.
Yeah, and we did do an interview with State School Board member Carol Lear. If you want to go back, you can hear her describe in great detail really the concerns around this when it comes to stripping away education funding, which honestly, I think many Utahns, I don't know if it's all, believe should be stable and should be stabilized.
And I think the earmark should go away. I think it's kind of a fiction because you can play around with the rates of income and sales tax to get around it.
So just a quick reminder as we head out here that this is Pledge Drive Week. And, if you value these discussions, you can head to upr.org and support the station. But Ben, you want to close us out?
Yep. You've been listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I'm Ben McAdams. I've been joined by Shireen Gorbani and John Dougal. Thank you to our producer, Anthony Scoma, and thank you to you, our listeners.